Well, hello everybody and welcome to episode 8 of Cardboard Time. This is Arwen and I am flying solo today. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different just because I thought that it would be a good idea to play a bunch of Dice Throne instead of getting podcast content together. So things are going to be a little bit shorter than normal, but we still have plenty of content and we will probably be back with the normal content and the normal formatting the next episode. Today's beer of the day is Ephemer Pomme by Unibrow, and hopefully I'm saying that right. It is the apple version of Ephemer. Very, very heavy on the apple flavor, a little bit too heavy for my tastes, and it has a real weird back-end aftertaste that I just can't seem to quite place. Not exactly my cup of tea or my glass of beer, if you will. It just did not hit right with me. And unfortunately, before I bought this, I didn't exactly look at my Untapped app. Apparently, I had it before and rated it a 2.5 out of 5, which is about where it sits right now with me still. So, not a huge fan of the Ephemer Pomme. Well, just to give you a little bit of a count update, my Shelf of Shame sits at 189. Now, I believe that is a little bit of an increase from last time, and the reason for that was that I went up to the Gaming Goat and bought 5 new games, so that was a thing. I also had some Kickstarters come in as well, so a little bit of an increase in the Shelf of Shame, but not too terribly bad. I was able to play a lot of those games, and a few of which we'll talk about today. Today's show, again, is going to be shorter than normal, but I really did want to give some early impressions on some solo modes that I've been playing recently. The first game that I'd like to talk about is a game that's on fire right now. It is Praga, Caput, Regni. 1 to 4 players, 30 to 120 minutes, and there is a reason for that spread, which we'll talk about in a minute. It was designed by Vladimir Suchi, who is the designer of Pulsar 2849, which I really need to get more people to play. It is such a fantastic game, really kind of underrated and one of those hidden gems. If you have an opportunity to play it, definitely take a look at Pulsar. It was published by Delicious Games and Rio Grande Games. And in Praga, Charles IV has been overseeing construction of new fortifications from his castle in Prague. Players take on the role of wealthy citizens who are organizing these projects. And for as crazy a game as this looks, and it is very, very intimidating from the outset to really look at and say, oh my god, there's so much on this board, the mechanics are really very simple. All you're going to do is take a tile, which has 2 of 6 different actions on it, and you're going to perform one of them. Very simple. What makes this game interesting is the fact that those tiles sit on a wheel, which dictates not only the bonus that you get for taking that action, but also the cost or potential victory point benefit that you'll also get for it. So once a player takes an action, the tile goes back on the wheel and the wheel rotates around. So the tiles that were towards the back of the wheel actually go forward and become a little bit more lucrative or less costly to take. After a certain number of actions, the round ends, and after a certain number of rounds, the game ends and the player with the highest score wins. So this game is incredibly satisfying, and if you've been listening to this podcast, one of the themes with me really is a game with a lot of decisions and strategic options and different routes to try to win. I really, really like games like that, and I really love playing around with those different paths and victory conditions. I think that there is something so incredibly satisfying about that, and this game definitely delivers on it, and there's a reason for the hype that everybody's giving it. The actual mechanical workings of the board are fantastic. So when you have this major wheel that you have all your actions on, there's a little hole that you place a wooden cube in. And then as that wheel rotates, there is a recessed spot in the board that once the round ends, that little cube falls into. It's perfect. It signifies the end of the round, It is a physical mechanism to say, hey, you have to remove this cube before I'm going to let you proceed. And I think that is so brilliant. Wonderful design. Player boards are also dual layered, which have 2 wheels on them, and there are spots where you have to put wooden cubes. If those wheels go past or try to go past a certain point, they can't. They are physically constrained, meaning that you have to take the cube out, give yourself bonus that's there, and it's a reminder that you've taken the bonus. Little things like that really, really are amazing design decisions that I give them a ton of credit for. There are bonuses galore in this game. So one of the things that you're going to be trying to do is come up with a little bit more efficient way of conducting your actions than maybe your opponent that might give you an extra action or a little bit more of a bonus than what your opponent is going to do. So it's those little tiny things that you're going to do that are going to get you to win. The solo gameplay is extremely fast if you're not AP prone. So there's 2 different solo variants. I only played the one. The solo variant that I played was just basically taking a tile and playing it, and then you take the next tile on the board and you place it on the wheel. So basically, whatever's the furthest along, you take that, you rotate the wheel, and then you take your turn again. So as soon as you're done taking your turn, it's immediately obvious what you have to do. No real thought involved. The second variant involves kind of an AI player. I didn't get to do that, but there is that option if you want a little bit more of a challenge. While the majority of scoring really does boil down to mostly a really elegant 3-dimensional set of multiplication tracks, the game is still incredibly fun to play. The one caveat that I really had with this game is that setup is definitely heavily involved. You have 2 tiers of 3 sets of tiles. So you have these buildings, you have these upgrades, and you have walls that you're going to put around your player board. And there are 2 different tiers of those. So you have your first tier, which is your more basic set, and then you have a more advanced tier as your engine builds up. You're going to swap these out halfway through the game. So it's a lot of setup, a lot of swapping out and changing things. I really want to print myself a nice insert for this game so I can have something that makes the setup a lot less tedious, because right now there really isn't anything good that you can do with the tiles. Everything just kind of fits in the box with the plastic baggies, and it's not really necessarily the best organization system in the world. But Praga is a really solid game. It's a lot of fun. I would definitely check it out if you have the opportunity. That is Praga, Caput, Regni. And next up on my list is another game that you might have heard about. It is Merv. And Merv plays from 1 to 4 players in 90 minutes, designed by Fabio Lopiano and published by Osprey Games. In Merv, players are trying to amass power and wealth in the prosperous heart of the Silk Road. Merv is a tense economic game charting the rise and fall of the greatest city in the world. Played over 3 rounds, players take turns choosing an action spot at the end of a row. They then determine which spot they want to take in that row, and if there isn't a building already there, they place their color building on that spot. They gather resources based on that spot and every matching color building in that row, and then take the action in their designated spot. So each spot has a action and a resource. You get all the resources for those matching colors, but you only get the action from that designated spot. Rounds consist of 4 turns, with scoring at the end of every round. After 3 rounds, the game is over, and the final scoring begins. The player with the most points wins. So, in my opinion, Merv's solo play was pretty good. It was definitely challenging. It was something that I thought was well done, but it just seemed to not capture the feel of playing what I envision to be the full game. The Automa really got in the way a lot, and it essentially cheated. So remember how I was describing, it was able to use its own and a dummy player's buildings instead of me just using my own. So gave it a very distinct advantage. There was an added layer of depth because of that, with eventually trying to block its actions, especially in the third round once its engine got really, really developed, by controlling where that dummy was going to place those buildings. I love how tight this game is. It is a extremely tight economic game, and on BGG, that was one of the first things that was mentioned, was that it is very tense. It is another game where you are going to want to do everything and feel like you need to do everything, but you really have to specialize in one or two complementary tracks while making sure that you have control over the right spaces that are going to give you the right resources, combined with the actions that you need to properly get an engine built up. It really is tight, and with only 12 turns, that is incredibly insane how small actions can really help that outcome at the end of the game. So the little tiny things that you're going to do to give yourself a little bit of leg up, much like in Praga, this is way tighter, and that is much more important. This is a thinky game, so you really have to be prepared for major AP issues, especially if you have AP-prone players. A lot of math, so a lot of figuring out, well, if I place this here, I could get 3 points at the end of this, but if I go over here, I might be able to get 5 points if I can go and actually get the right actions and resources I need. So there's a lot of thinking those combinations out and trying to figure out what you want to do. It is an incredibly thinky game, something that you do want to consider with your more AP-prone players. That said, with the solo mode, again, I felt like it did not exactly simulate the amazing interaction that you are going to get in this game with 3 and 4 players. It's really going to shine there, and I can see just by playing the solo version, and even though the solo version had those issues where I didn't feel that it really represented the full game experience, I could see how when you use another player's building combo and when you're going and trying to think about where you're placing things, I can see that interaction being a huge part of this and really, really amazing. So I am so looking forward to being able to play this with a full complement of people. And I think that's where this game is going to really shine. But Merv, very, very satisfying. Gonna stay on the shelves for a while, and hopefully we get it played soon. Well, one game that I didn't play solo was Holi, Festival of Colors. And Holi plays with 2 to 4 players, so solo is not an option. I don't know if there is a solo option on BGG yet or not. Fortunately, I did not have to look that up because I had somebody that was willing to play with me. It plays in 20 to 40 minutes, designed by Julio E. Nazario, and published by Floodgate Games. Players in Holi gather to celebrate the end of winter as they spread colorful powder on each other, dancing and celebrating new beginnings. In Holi, players are going to take cards that have patterns on them. Those patterns correspond to where they can place their color tokens, which occupy the board and sometimes hit other players for bonus points. The board has 3 vertical tiers on it, and if a player is ever surrounded by orthogonally adjacent color tokens, they get to ascend to the next level, which could potentially score them more points for each color token. The player with the most points at the end of the game wins. So the concept behind Holi is very, very simple. And fortunately, Allie was willing to play this with me. I think when we looked at it in the store, it was very visually appealing. There's a lot of color going on the front of the box. And looking at the back, you can see this kind of 3-tiered, 3-dimensional board, which also really attracts people. Once you get it set up, it's even more attractive. You get to see those colors, you get to see the tokens that get placed. It just really has a very, very nice table presence, very colorful and very visually attractive game. The game was very easy to pick up and teach. It took about 7 minutes to explain the concepts of what was going on, and we were playing. So extremely simple, super easy to get to the table. And this is another game that I feel will work much better at a higher player count with more players, spreading those tokens out on the board. We didn't actually make it up to the 3rd level because we didn't see the incentive to head all the way to the top. So you have these powder tokens tokens that are getting placed. And when you get them placed on the first level, that's great. You score a point for each of them. Once you ascend and you go to the second level, you get 2 points per token. But the thing is, if those tokens don't have anything below them, they then fall down to the first level. And sometimes you can hit players with those, but also sometimes it's just going to fall down and not get you those points that you're looking for when you've ascended up top. So that was something that we didn't have enough of those tokens out on the board to really kind of feel like we needed to ascend up to that third level. Not that it was a bad game or that we felt cheated. It didn't seem like the right thing to do. So it was fine. But again, I do think that this would work much better at a higher player count, just to kind of get more tokens out there and be able to hit those higher levels. This game does have a great potential for replayability with the rivalry cards. So you can very easily teach the game, play a very simple version without these cards, and then add these in. So what these rivalry cards do is add or modify scoring conditions and rules to the game. So different levels might score additional points, or you may score different amounts of points for hitting people with your color tokens. All those different things switch up the gameplay and can really provide a lot of replayability and a different experience every single time. So I give them kudos for adding those and just adding a little bit extra to what is normally a very basic experience. But I really enjoyed Holi. Again, it's a nice three-dimensional puzzle that's easy enough for people to understand and get to the table relatively quickly, and we had a great time with it. I would highly recommend Holi Festival of Colors. And of course, I had to talk about it because it finally came in, along with Crokinole, but I will talk about Crokinole on a later podcast. And this is just a touch on the subject. It is not my full review, but I had to touch on Dice Throne Adventures, which finally came to my doorstep. I was so incredibly happy to see it. It was a very, very hefty box because I got Dice Throne Adventures and the Season 1 characters re-rolled. So when they had the original Kickstarter, they had this set of characters, and they had a more basic design. The characters were fine. The player mats were good. I mean, the components were okay. But this re-rolled experience gives you better player tokens. It gives you a much more well-designed mat, and it gives you everything in a very compact box that you're able to put into this battle box. And the battle box has all these different characters in it, and you just pick this character up. It has its own tray. It has the spots for the tokens that they need and the wonderful, beautiful dice that it comes with. So that was Season 1 re-rolled. Dice Throne Adventures, which I'm going to talk about now. 1 to 4 players, 90 to 120 minutes, which I will touch on in a minute. Designed by Gavin Brown, Nate Chatelier, and Manny Tremblay, and published by Roxley Games. So the original Dice Throne could really best be described as Battle Yahtzee. So players use combos on their 5 dice to activate abilities, deal damage, and heal themselves in player versus player combat. So you're rolling these dice. On your player board, you have these different combinations, and you try to pick the best one that matches what you rolled. You do damage, you heal, you activate these special abilities, and you go back and forth until one of the players runs out of hit points. The other player wins. Dice Throne Adventures is an expansion that takes that mechanism, and it's not standalone. You do have to have either Dice Throne Season 1 or Season 2, or both in my case. So it takes that mechanism, and it has players using that mechanism to crawl through dungeons and these difficult boss characters, leveling up their abilities along the way in an 8-stage cooperative campaign. So it really turned the formula on its head and took this PvP, very simple game that you were rolling dice, boom, I'm dealing damage back and forth. And now you're making it a co-op dungeon crawl. If you couldn't tell, I'm a huge fan. I've been talking about this game for ages. This was obviously an insta-back for me when it came to Kickstarter. I really do enjoy cooperative games quite a bit, and they do tend to be easier in general when you're trying to teach people. So that makes my life easier, as I'm usually the one that's teaching those games. Production value on both the Season 1 Rerolled and the Dice Throne Adventures experience is top-notch, and that's what we've come to expect from Roxley. They are a top-tier company when it comes to production value and that experience. It also includes some of the best organization that I've ever seen in the game, and I think Allie was getting very annoyed with me when I was unboxing everything and I was putting everything into the little game trays. I was punching everything out, and the tokens go into this nice game trays container, and you have everything right at your fingertips. And I was basically sitting there saying, you know what, this is how you do this. I'm like showing it. I'm almost like shoving it in her face. Like, here is how you do this. I was so excited and nerding out over this thing. I give them so many props for whoever came up with the system and whoever really did the research to organize this, because you are very easily able to quickly get the components that you need out to the table, and it's incredibly important in this game. So well done to Roxley and the whole team that designed this for that production value. The artwork's fantastic, as we've come to expect. Again, the high-powered legendary cards that come out and the promos, at least on the Kickstarter version. I don't know about the actual just in-store retail version, but they have a foil-type sheen on them, and it makes them feel either extra dangerous for enemies, or when you're pulling those legendary cards, when they get put into your deck and then you're able to pull them back out and you draw them, they feel extra satisfying when you pull them. So it's a nice little extra touch. I noticed that some people online didn't necessarily care for it. I really enjoyed it. If you really like those extra fancy little details, you're going to love this. Depending on the player count and scenario, that 90-minute mark that I was telling you about at the beginning of this can be more towards the 45 to 60-minute range. So if you're going up against a boss and you're using a character that deals a lot of damage, for instance, in my playthrough, I'm using the Pyromancer, who is basically a very high damage dealing glass cannon. You have to get in there, you have to be quick about how you do things, get your engine built up, deal as much damage as you can, and kill the boss before they can kill you. It's very simple. So in those scenarios, this can play very, very quickly. But I can also see how if you're playing a character that's healing a lot, that does a little bit of damage, but is trying to play out the waiting game, that can be much more towards that 120-minute mark. So it does definitely have a range. This game absolutely works well for solo. Out of these games that I've talked about today, this is the game that I would prefer to play solo out of anything. It does begin to feel a little bit samey at the higher levels because of a lack of variety of higher powered enemies. Where you have more players, you may wind up with a little bit more variety of enemies as one player's attacking this one player's attacking this other one. So you're able to maybe diversify a little bit. There is some legacy content that's unlocked at the end of the game, so I'm hoping that there's going to be a little bit more there as far as variety goes. The dungeon content can also feel like a grind if you know that you have a low chance of success. So one of the major things in Dice Throne Adventures is these salves that help you heal. You get a certain amount of them at the beginning of your campaign. So you get 3. And then along the way, you're going to pick them up, but you're also going to be using them. And what you end up with from one segment of the campaign translates over to the next level. So if you ended the first dungeon with 5 salves, that's what you start the next dungeon with. If you lose, then you get another 3 to start off with. So you add that on. But a lot of times you're going to be using those salves to heal, and you're going to wind up getting down to 0. You may wind up having to play a dungeon crawl just to go and kind of grind and get some of those salves back. That was something that I was a little bit hit or miss on. I would like to experience this with one more player that would combo well with my character, but I do feel like more characters may actually drag on a bit. So this may wind up being a game that plays better at those lower player counts. You definitely get familiar with your character that you're playing and how they play. So you very quickly kind of realize this is the kind of engine that I have to build up. These are the abilities that I have to use on a regular basis, and this is how I can ramp these up very quickly. So you do definitely develop an intimate feeling with those characters and how they play. I should be through the normal mode in a few more play sessions, and I may wind up switching characters for another playthrough on the harder difficulty. I'm already 8 out of 10 for my 10x10 playthroughs for this year, so I played 8 times already out of my 10. This is definitely a game that's seen a lot of table time, and one of the reasons I didn't prep for this session all that much, and the fact that I wasn't really able to get any games out with anybody. So I was just kind of down in the basement playing this all weekend, pretty much, with some breaks to play Holi and Merv. I'm loving this game. I really am. I am so glad that I got it on Kickstarter. It's not necessarily going to be for everybody, but I do recommend checking it out if Battle Yahtzee dungeon crawling sounds like something that you would enjoy. This would be right up your alley. So that is Dice Throne Adventures. Like I said, today's episode is going to be short. Again, a lot of solo playthroughs. I do need to get these games out with some friends to be able to get a real, true experience and a final rating out for them. But again, as usual, make sure to check out our Facebook. Make sure to check out our Instagram at cardboard_time. Have a look at our Board Game Geek podcast page. Any questions, suggestions, or ideas for discussion topics, please email cardboardtime@gmail.com. And as always, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again in another 2 weeks for hopefully what's going to be a much more full episode of Cardboard Time. Thanks, everybody.